Good evening. It is the Locker Room live match reaction after Scotland's 2-0 victory against Armenia tonight at Hampden Park from the Nations League. My name is Graham Duffy, and you will notice that I am not joined by Michael McKeown or David Smith tonight, but instead I am joined by the fabulous, and he didn't pay me to say that, James Elliott. James, how are you, mate?
I'm absolutely brilliant, Graham. It's great to be back on the Locker Room with yourself. It's always something I look forward to.
Fantastic to hear that. So we are going to be here till 11:30. We are obviously live on Independence Live. We are also live on YouTube. We are live on Facebook, and we are live on Twitter as well. So any comments, please keep them coming on your thoughts on today's game. Who was your man of the match? Who really impressed? And most importantly, we won by 2-0. So let's start with the team that lined up tonight. There were 6 changes tonight. So out went Hanley, McTominay, Cooper, Dykes, Hickey and Gilmore. And the team was Craig Gordon in goal. It was a back three, a new back three of John Suter, Jack Henry and Scott McKenna. A midfield of Anthony Ralston, Callum McGregor, John McGinn and Andy Robertson, with Stuart Armstrong and Ryan Christie supporting Shea Adams up front. James, was there any surprises in that team sheet for you in terms of who was out and who started the game?
Yes. the 6 changes I did find surprising. Often when you change that many players in a team, it kind of upsets things. But after what happened against Ukraine, I don't really think that could have happened. I was surprised with the back three. Out of those 3 players, the only one that I really like is John Suter. I think Henry's good. Jack Henry's a good player, but for me, he's a bit too slow at times. And I'm still undecided about McKenna. He was fine when he was at Aberdeen. I've not really seen much of him since he went to Forest, and now obviously he's a Premier League player because Forest are going up. But I thought all 3 of them were very good, and out of those 3, the best was John Suter.
In terms of that team that started, were you maybe a little bit surprised, because I certainly was, that Andy Robertson started, given how many games he's played this season?
To be honest, I was and I wasn't, if you know what I mean. I, like a lot of people, felt that he probably may have given him a rest and might have brought him on, later on in the game or something like that. But at the same time, I think because he's the captain, I think it's important that he should be playing every game unless, physically he's not up for it. But it would have been nice to see Aaron Hickey playing from the start on the left, because I thought he did quite well against Ukraine, although I've seen a lot of people saying, that they don't think he did particularly well. But I felt he did.
Obviously, the disappointment of last week against Ukraine, we all know. We had the show last week and it was a massive letdown. But in terms of this game tonight, I know Armenia are 92nd in the world, but in terms of this game tonight, how important do you think it was that Scotland started this Nations campaign with a victory?
Absolutely vital, in my opinion. Not just because they lost out on the World Cup, which obviously was quite a big blow, but this particular tournament, I had my doubts about it when it was introduced, and I'm thinking to myself, well, it's just a back door, for teams to get in. But how well Scotland did the last time round, and they got into the playoffs and stuff like that. Out of this group that Scotland are in at the moment, I think it will be between Scotland and Ukraine who actually comes out on top. So a win tonight was vital. If we can get a win against Ireland on Saturday, that'll be great. And then if we, don't lose in Armenia next week, if we even only manage a draw in Armenia, we're still in a very strong position. But if we could get 9 points from the first 3 games, boy, what an advantage.
Yeah, I actually was thinking about this the other day. I think we should be getting 9 points out of 9 from these games. I don't think Ireland are particularly great. Now, I know we saw tonight, Armenia, they didn't really offer a lot, but you can only beat what's put in front of you. And I think for me, I think it was a massive, massive result tonight. And the only disappointment I would say is that we didn't score more, because I think there was more chances in that game for us.
Definitely. I mean, but for the want of some better finishing, we could probably have had 3 or 4 goals. We could certainly have had 3 in the first half. And I was quite surprised that, they were going to VAR for the third, well, what would have been the third goal, the second for Mckenna. I didn't pick up that he was actually offside, before he got the ball to put it in the net. I was thinking they were pulling him up for offside from scoring the goal, and I'm thinking he can't be offside because there was the goalkeeper and 2 Armenian players on the line. He's definitely not offside, but it was the play up before that he was offside.
I actually thought the reason it being called off because I thought the ball was actually out at the time and it came back in.
Maybe that is.
But then watching it again, I think he probably was just slightly offside. So to try and be professional, I actually took notes during this game. I've never done that before, but I thought, well, I need to take notes. So my first note here is 4th minute, Stuart Armstrong hit the post, and it was brilliant play actually by a man we'll talk about very shortly, Anthony Ralston, making his first start. Yeah. Now, it was a really good opportunity for Scotland, and to be honest, it was a very good start.
Yeah. And I must admit, for me, the man of the match was Ralston. And I think I said this on our WhatsApp group during the game. I'm amazed at the change in that player since, Ange Postecoglou came in at Celtic, because he was effectively on the way out at Celtic, because he'd only played once in the season, prior, and he didn't do particularly well, when he was playing for Celtic prior to that. But then Ange Postecoglou comes in, don't know what he said to the player or what he's done to the player, but it's a complete turnaround. And for him to get into the Scotland squad was great, but to get his debut tonight and then obviously cap it off by scoring an absolutely wonderful goal.
Now, I know it's still very early days, but do you think that now, after that performance from Ralston, he will be starting against Ireland on Saturday? Or is it a case that Nathan Patterson might come back in? Because obviously Patterson came on tonight, but do you think Ralston has done more than enough now to start that game?
Well, if I was managing Scotland, I would stick with the starting 11. Assuming everybody's fit for the weekend, I would stick with the same 11 players to start the game. However, I think Steve Clarke might just give the nod to Patterson. And it wouldn't be a bad decision in that respect. It would be slightly dodgy because, the boy's been out for it's about 3 months or something. He was out with an ankle injury. So it's the whole thing about, match fitness and stuff like that. But that brings me to a point that I wanted to kind of get across anyway, is I can't understand why he doesn't use David Turnbull. He's had him in squads, and I think David Turnbull is an absolutely wonderful footballer, and he's got something in his locker that allows him to, unlock a defence. I think maybe Steve Clarke doesn't like him. Although he picks him for the squad, I don't think he rates him better than what he has, other players in the midfield.
So do you think if, he was to start, would he be taking, Ryan Christie or Armstrong's place?
It would have to be one of those two, because I really can't see you not having McGregor. Although I think in the second half, especially towards the end of the game, I thought McGregor looked a little bit leggy. And it's been a long season for him, and obviously he was out for a while with the injury because he's still wearing that mask and stuff. But I can't, again, I think McGregor's a bit like Robertson, they're two players that should be like the first names on your team sheet. Obviously your goalkeeper, in this instance, Craig Gordon, would be, the man that you're going to put in between the sticks. But I would imagine that you would have to have McGregor and Robertson as the next sort of two names, if you like, that would definitely be on your team sheet. And I would put McTominay on, but in the midfield, because he's far better in a midfield role than he is in a defensive role.
I know we're obviously going to talk about tonight's game, but I just have to ask. I mean, I know Steve Clarke might not have many regrets, but if you look at that starting 11 tonight, now I know it was only Armenia, But if you look at that game against Ukraine, we had Scott McTominay, you had Grant Hanley, and you had Liam Cooper, who haven't had great seasons for their club team.
Yeah.
Tonight he plays obviously Jack Henry. You've got Scott McKenna who scores, and you've got John Souttar. Do you think? I know hindsight's wonderful, but do you think that should have been the starting three last week against Ukraine?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you on that. The only, not even a concern, but the only thing that I was slightly concerned about was, how fit John Souttar would be, because obviously he was out for quite a while before the end of the season, and he came back in for the cup final, which I didn't see, but by all accounts, a lot of people have said, that they felt he was Hearts' best player on the day. Whether or not you would agree with that, I don't know, Graham. But that was my only kind of concern, that he might not last the 90 minutes. But yeah, I would think those three, for me, they're better than the three that were in at the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I've said already, I'm not a massive Scott McTominay fan in that centre-back position. So to see actual proper centre-backs that looked quite comfortable tonight. And yeah, John Souttar, the cup final, he was excellent for Hearts, mainly because he was the only person that actually turned up that day. But he was very impressive. But if you look back at tonight's game again, I've written down 7 minutes. Andy Robertson has a really good shot that was well saved by the keeper. Now, again, I spoke about Robertson earlier. I thought tonight he looked a lot better than he did against Ukraine. Yeah. I know, again, I keep saying it. I know it was on Armenia, but he did look a lot sharper tonight.
But do you know what? Let's take it back to the first game that Armenia had against the Republic of Ireland. They played basically the same system, right? And Ireland had pretty much, I think at one point they had over 70% possession in that game, but they couldn't break Armenia down. Now, Scotland were getting in behind them, which is the thing that Ireland struggled with. And that was why Scotland were getting shots at goal and all the rest of it and making the goalkeeper work. Because the first game against Ireland, the goalkeeper for Armenia had very little to do. They're not a bad side, Armenia. Technically, they've got some very good players, but they came probably not with a view of winning the game as such, but, getting something out of the game. I mean, let's be honest, if you're playing 5 across the back, 4 in your midfield, you're not really there to attack.
Do you think that the fact that we obviously changed the system tonight, and obviously you had Robertson, you had Ralston getting a lot further forward, that obviously must have been a massive help as you talked about getting him behind?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every time since Steve Clarke's taken over, any of the Scotland games I've seen that I've been impressed by, the fullbacks have always pushed high up the park, and they've got in behind and they've got crosses. And the only thing with the Andy Robertson shot, at first I thought it was a complete mishit. I didn't realise the keeper had actually made a very good save, which he had done. But then I thought to myself, I think Shea Adams got caught flat-footed with that because, possibly if he was quicker, he might have got something on the end of it and, would have put the ball in the net. But no, it was a brilliant shot from Andy Robertson, and Andy Robertson was on top form tonight. It's probably one of the best games I think I've seen him play for Scotland.
He was, to be fair, the keeper actually made a very good save as well.
Yeah, he made a few saves.
He did. Actually, the next note I've got is 12th minute. Armenia managed to get him behind. It was an easy save for Craig Gordon. That was pretty much the only kind of slight concern in that first half was it did get in behind a couple of times, but nothing really major, to be honest.
Yeah. The problem, of course, that they had was that they were essentially playing with one man up front. And when they hit the ball to him, the boy was very good at getting onto it and keeping possession and holding things up till somebody came up. But when the support came to him, by the time that happened, there was enough bodies there for, Scotland not to be too worried about. And you know what? I don't really worry when Craig Gordon's in goal. You know what I mean? When he played for Celtic, he was absolutely top notch. When he played for Hearts the first time round, he was top notch. When he went to Sunderland, he was top notch. And now he's back at Hearts. He's had a great season again, for them. And more power to his elbow, I say.
Absolutely. The next note I've got is about the 19th minute. There was quite a few chances in this first few minutes, to be honest. John McGinn had a long-range effort just over the bar. And then the next major thing I've got is 28 minutes, and I've put in big capital letters, Ralston goal.
What did he score?
Apparently, yeah.
No, it was an absolutely fantastic move. It really was, and I think it was well deserved for Anthony Ralston, that he scored that goal, because he had, up until that point, as you say, 20 minutes into the game or whatever, he had done a power of work, and that was just a fair reward for everything he'd done up until that point. But it was well played to get to the goal.
Yeah, it was a great cross from Stuart Armstrong as well. Beautiful cross and a fantastic header for Ralston, who I said in the group chat was getting in quite a few times at that back post, and he made that one count. But I mean, to be fair, he had that full back on toast every time Ralston came forward. They just looked to beat him all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well the fact that, often when a player is playing in that kind of position, and they always look to go past the defender and get to the byline and whip the ball across. But Ralston doesn't always do that. He'll sort of feint as if he's going to try and get past, and then he'll cut back and he'll play the ball inside, or he'll cut inside himself and take a shot on or whatever. So from a defender's point of view, although he is a defender himself, it's quite difficult to stay with him, because, you can never really be absolutely certain he's just going to go for the line, which a lot of wingers will do. A lot of proper wingers only go for the byline. They very rarely cut inside. So
after that, I've got 36 minutes, Ryan Christie just over the bar. Again, I thought Christie looked okay today, playing kind of behind Adams alongside Armstrong. How did you think Christie did?
Yeah, I think he had a very good game. And he had a couple of really good shots throughout the game. One in particular in the second half towards the end of the game, where he struck the ball with the outside of his boot and it just kind of went past the post. I think he deserved the goal, Ryan Christie, just for his overall play. He had a really, really good game. Best game I've seen him playing for Scotland for quite a while, actually.
I think the thing with guys like Stuart Armstrong and Ryan Christie, they bring that energy about them. And I thought, again, they both showed that tonight.
Yeah. Sometimes, I sometimes think that they're quite similar football players. And sometimes it doesn't work when they're both on the pitch at the same time. But tonight it did work, because they were very clearly, one on the left, one on the right, although they did interchange during the game as well. They kind of swapped it around a little bit. But both of them had very good games. In fact, you know what? The whole Scotland team had a very good game. I can't really criticise any of the Scotland players tonight, which is unusual for me, because I usually always manage to find somebody that I can complain about.
You should have been here last week, mate. There was plenty of criticism, I'll tell you. But the next...
No, I wouldn't have been good on the show last week, Graham. There would have been too many words getting bleeped out.
The next note I've got, again, capital letters. I never thought I'd be saying these words. Scott Mckenna scores for Scotland.
I know. It was absolutely amazing. And I was quite surprised that, the Armenian players were kind of complaining, trying to say he was offside or whatever, But when you see it in the replays, the Armenian defender actually has a hold of Mckenna. He's actually got a hold of his arm. And McKenna is just strong. I think it was Ali McCoy said in the commentary, that he just stayed strong. And, he out-jumped the boy, and it was in the back of the net.
As I said in the group chat, if you'd placed a bet on two players to score for Scotland, I don't think anybody would have had Anthony Ralston and Scott McKenna.
No, I definitely wouldn't have had them down as goal scorers, that's for sure.
But the next note I've got is just on half-time, Scott McKenna didn't get his second goal, and we were running for a hat-trick in the second half, which just sounds nuts to say, because the goal was ruled out for offside, or to be honest, at the time I thought it was because the ball was out of play. What was your thoughts on the games?
Well, as I said, at first because they were saying it was going to VAR and they were talking about offside, I'm thinking, well, it can't be offside because the goalkeeper's there and there's two defenders on the line. So there's no way that, he's offside. But it was when they actually looked a little bit further back in the play, when the ball was getting crossed the first time, I think it's maybe his toe or half of his foot is probably offside. And that's what the decision was made on. But it was one of those things that if there hadn't been VAR, that would have been a third goal. It would never have been chalked off.
Now, something that I did actually not notice at the time, but it was mentioned during half-time in the analysis, was just as Scott McKenna had scored that goal, we didn't know it was obviously ruled out at the time, but an Armenian player appears to throw a bottle at the assistant. Now, listen, frustration's all over at times, but you can't be doing that.
No. And like you said, in real time, I never seen it. But when they were doing the half-time analysis, and obviously, they can then slow things down and all the rest of it, and they can pick certain things out. Whether he was throwing it at the other official, I don't know. It was certainly a frustration, and he threw the bottle in frustration. I would like to give him the benefit of the doubt that he wasn't throwing it at the linesman, but he was lucky that it wasn't picked up. And I don't know, maybe there'll be some sort of retrospective action taken against him. I don't know. But it was
very
silly.
Possibly. Yeah, but I think it clearly was frustration, but the goal got ruled out anyway, so it didn't really matter anyway. So into the second half, I mean, let's be honest, the second half wasn't quite as intense as the first half, but there were still a few chances. There was a chance just at about 76 minutes. Che Adams has a chance he can't get the ball at his feet. But again, I think the 71st minute he made 3 changes. Now, Nathan Patterson came on for Anthony Ralston. Scott McTominay came on for Stuart Armstrong. And Aaron Hickey came on for Andy Robertson. Now, I think Andy Robertson, if anyone deserves a rest, it was him, because he must be absolutely knackered with how many games he's played.
Yeah, I think it's something like just shy of 70 games Robertson's played, counting, league games for Liverpool and European Cups and all that kind of stuff. It's been a long old season, and then obviously there was, international games and all that kind of thing. So it is a long old season, but do you know what? They're professional footballers, they're professional athletes. So I don't really buy into, they don't do well at the end of the season because they're tired. Yes, certain players might get like that, but I think it's probably more a case of mental tiredness than, physical tiredness. And yes, huge disappointment for Robertson, from the point of view where they potentially could have had 4 trophies, and they end up with 2, and then losing out on the last day, of the Premier League to Manchester City. But then in saying that, do you know what? That particular day, Liverpool didn't deserve to win that title anyway because they didn't play that well.
Don't remind me, it still hurts.
Oh, that's right. You're a closet red, aren't you?
I am. I've never been in the closet from that. But it was gutting for me and gutting for Andy Robertson. But do you know what? I'll take 2 trophies. But in terms of one of the players that went off, you spoke about already, said man of the match, and I completely agree. Anthony Ralston, we have to talk about him. Now, we've said numerous times on the show before that when Ange Postecoglou first came in, a lot of folk thought, Ralston's not going to be good enough for Celtic. He's had a brilliant season for Celtic, and now he's starting for Scotland, and he scored on his first Scotland start. If you're Anthony Ralston, you probably couldn't have dreamed of this at the start of the season, I don't think.
No, and to be honest, I don't think he may well have even been dreaming that he would have been in the Celtic squad at the start of the season. Certainly not for the start of the league campaign. Maybe, the pre-season stuff, he might have picked up games and stuff like that. But just based on his, performance in the season before. But in saying that, he was in a team that was bad the season before. The Celtic team the season previous was terrible, and they didn't deserve to win anything that season. So, but as I say, I don't know what Ange Postecoglou's done with Ralston, but he's turned him into a much, much better player. And then when they brought in Juranovic, I thought to myself, do you know what? I don't really see Ralston, getting picked over him. And there was a few times when he did get picked ahead of Juranovic. So obviously Postecoglou sees something there and worked on it and has turned him into what he is now, somebody who's going to turn out for his national team and score goals.
I think as much as Postecoglou deserves a lot of credit for what he's done, I think you also have to give credit for Ralston as well, because he's listened to what Postecoglou's told him. He's learning quite a lot, and he just looks a far, far better player now. And now he's an international player as well.
Yeah, and any football player worth their salt, right? Whether they're brilliantly naturally talented, they've got to listen to what they're being told. They've got to take on board, the ideas and the opinions of others, because that's the only way that they're going to learn and they're going to grow. And obviously, Anthony Ralston has, the new manager's come in. He's spoken to him. Obviously, don't know what he said to him, but he said to him, maybe, you've got a chance of being in this team. Show me what you can do. And he's grabbed it by both hands and he's gone in there and he's had a brilliant season.
100%, and absolutely man of the match for me tonight as well. I think, there was another chance. John McKenna had a shot. Good save again from the keeper. Actually, it was a great save because he's actually touched on it at the crossbar. It was a great save. And I think there wasn't really... there was a couple of maybe little chances for Armenia. But to be fair, defensively, Scotland were very, very comfortable tonight. And Craig Gordon had very little to do. Yeah.
One of the big chances for Armenia actually came because, ultimately Jack Henry slipped, but he was very slow in turning when the ball get played over for the Armenian player to latch onto it. And see, to be honest, again, if it hadn't been for Suter, possibly, Armenia might have got a goal out of that. But Suter came across, covered his partner brilliantly. And then ultimately, they clear the ball and they get away with it. But it's just, as I said before, for me, at times, Jack Henry is too slow and laboured with what he does. He wants that extra touch sometimes. And, you can't really do that, especially not. But, okay, Armenia, again, no disrespect. They're not a Ukraine or, a top nation in that respect. But you know what? If you're a good football player, it doesn't matter where your country is in the international standings. If you're a good football player and you've got a quick football brain, you can take advantage of somebody who likes to take an extra touch is just a wee bit slow.
Would you start Jack Henry against Ireland on Saturday?
Yeah, as I said before, I would have Mckenna, Henry, and a Suter as the back three on Saturday. I don't think Scott McTominay should ever be played in a back line. He's far better as a midfield player. Liam Cooper, I don't really know that well. I can honestly say I've never really watched him play. But Grant Hanley, for me, is just a big Clydesdale horse. He's useless. If it was up to me, he wouldn't get a game for a pub team. How he's a professional football player is beyond me. There was guys playing the Junior Cup final at the weekend that would be better.
To be fair, I've seen some of the pub teams here in Pennycook could get a game for them. I'm not going to lie. The one thing I was a little bit surprised about, now I know they did get on eventually, but for the last 10 minutes or so, I would have given Ross Stewart and Jacob Brown a bit of a longer run out. Now, they did get the last 5 minutes, but a game that was pretty much done, why not give them slightly longer than that?
Yeah, I'm a great believer that if you're going to substitute a player, you don't do it with a few minutes left in the game, unless, they're picked up an injury and they can't continue. But for somebody like Stewart, who's had a brilliant season for Sunderland, I think it's 26 or 27 goals he scored for Sunderland this season. Give him 15, maybe 20 minutes, minimum. And the other laddie, Brown, I think it's 16 goals he got for Stoke this season. Again, a little bit longer on the pitch. And that allows them then to maybe show that they can form a partnership, and if you can't then have Adams and Dykes playing, you've got another partnership there that can take over.
Obviously, you weren't on the show last week, but I'm going to ask you this anyway. Now I've got you here. So I raised this point last week during the Ukraine game. Now, I know Graham Spears was on the show last week, and he said, obviously, Ross Stewart is coming from a third-tier club. Is he the answer? But for me last week, you're 2-1 down at home to Ukraine, and you play Grant Hanley up front. Why would you not give Ross Stewart a chance? The guy's a goal scorer. The ball could drop in the box, and he might take a chance. Why would you not give him a chance?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That is what he does, right? He is a goal scorer. He's a forward. He's a striker, whatever you want to call him, right? That's the job that he's there to do. Now, you're losing the game anyway, so there would have been no harm, the last 10, 15 minutes of the game, putting him on, even though he was untried. I can kind of understand why he didn't get on, but I think if I was the man in charge, I'd be inclined to say, right, son, get your boots laced up and let's see what you can do. Because you're not going to lose anything anymore by putting him on. But putting one of your centre-backs up there to play centre-forward, you leave yourself a bit of a gap at the back for other goals to get scored.
And that's what happened as well, because you came out of the park and scored a third goal. So that just kind of proves the point, really. But in terms of tonight, obviously we spoke about Ralston, we spoke about John Suter, who was very good against a disappointing Armenian side, but we'll take it. Did anyone else stand out? Did anyone else stand out to you in that team?
To be honest, I think they all stood out. As I said, I don't really think anybody had a bad game as such. There were a couple of little things that I was a little bit disappointed in with players, in terms of the finishing. But it's Scotland, and we don't really score lots and lots of goals in games, you know what I mean? And even historically, we've never really scored a barrel load of goals in a game. That's just how it is. I seen a thing earlier on this week, Joe Jordan was kind of complaining about, the fact that we don't really have goal scorers like we used to have back in the day when he was playing for Scotland. So I kind of agree with him. But what I like about this current Scotland setup is that a lot of these players are young players and they're playing at a high level with their clubs and they're getting lots of European experience. And that only bodes well. Yes, we didn't get to the World Cup for later on this year, but they got Scotland to the European Championships last year. I think they'll get Scotland to the Euros the next time round. And I think they'll probably take Scotland to the next World Cup after Qatar as well, as long as that group can kind of stay together and grow together.
I think in terms of last week, now I was on Twitter last week after the game and I saw a lot of folk that were angry, they were disappointed, which is fine. But I saw that Aaron Hickey got quite a lot of stick, which I thought was very, very harsh. I mean, obviously Hickey didn't start tonight. He came on with the last 50 minutes to go. I mean, I've seen Aaron Hickey at Hearts. I think he's a very good player. Do you think Aaron Hickey is good enough to make this step for Scotland?
Yeah, I do. And I think potentially he's good enough to do it, even playing at right back, although he is a left back. But do you know what? It was his first game. He was up against a top quality team, albeit, that the Ukrainian team hadn't really been able to play games because of the situation with the war in their homeland and all the rest of it. But they're top players. And there were players in that Ukrainian team who play in the likes of the English Premiership, and other top leagues in Europe as well. So, it's not as if they came up against a team like, and again, no disrespect, but a team like, say, Armenia, who had been in the same situation where they were coming from a war-torn country and hadn't managed to play many games, and their domestic league was suspended, so their players weren't playing much. and then got turned over. But Ukraine are a very, very good team.
Do you think, obviously, because we knew we were going to have a lot of possession tonight, do you think that Steve Clark maybe might have thought about starting Aaron Hickey tonight, just give him a bit more confidence, maybe?
Yeah, as I said, I don't really see why he didn't, because I personally thought that he would have started. And as I said earlier, I thought that Robertson would have sat it out, maybe come on, with 20 minutes, 25 minutes to go in the second half or whatever, just to kind of keep him ticking over for the weekend. I think it would have been a game that he wouldn't have been particularly bothered, Hickey, in terms of, the quality of the player that he would have been up against, as opposed to the quality of the player from Ukraine. But as I said, I understand why Robertson played. And, as the team captain, I think he has to play, every game if he's fit and up for it. Like every player, he's going to have an off game, And at the time, as a supporter and a fan, you're going to berate him because he's had a bad game. And he had a bad game against Ukraine. There's no two ways about it. But he redeemed himself tonight. He really played the captain's role. And I've heard it said often by people that he doesn't give the performance for Scotland that he gives for Liverpool. And to a certain extent, there's probably a bit of truth in that. But then Kenny Dalglish was a bit like that. But Kenny Dalglish was a player that was head and shoulders above the rest of the team round about him at that time. And a lot of players on the Scotland side at that time couldn't get on the same wavelength. And to a certain extent, I think the same's true for Andy Robertson. He thinks about things the way that he would do it with Liverpool, and he's got a better quality of player at Liverpool that is on the same wavelength as him. But tonight, he was right on his game, and everybody else was there up on his game as well.
Yeah, I mean, previously playing for Scotland, you look at Robertson and he's got you look in the box for Liverpool and he's got Mane, he's got Salah, he's got Firmino in there. Yeah. At times playing for Scotland, you're looking up and he's got Ollie McBurney or Oliver Burke to hit. It's no surprise he doesn't play that well for Scotland, really, is it? But
no.
I mean, tonight, to be honest, after that game last week, I wasn't sure how Scotland would do tonight. I wasn't sure if obviously last week would take a lot out of them. But I thought tonight we looked a lot sharper. We played on the front foot, and when we didn't have the ball, we pressed and won it back, and that really impressed me tonight.
Yeah, and of course they were on a bit of a hiding to nothing, Scotland. Just purely because Armenia 92nd or whatever it is in the world rankings. If they hadn't won, even by one goal, it was a disaster. If they had lost, it would have been a catastrophe. That's just how it is. So they had to get something from the game, and it had to be the victory. As I say, even if it was just a 1-0 victory and a scrappy 1-0 victory, it had to be the victory. It was needed because they let themselves down and they let the fans down. And I think a lot of the players would probably admit that themselves, that overall their performance last week wasn't up to par. I was a bit surprised that they weren't that good against Ukraine. And I suppose to a certain extent, I maybe underestimated Ukraine as well because of the situation they were in, with the war and all that, and the domestic league, being cancelled and stuff like that. And I probably just kind of ignored the fact that they had some very good players playing in other leagues that, weren't affected by it. But I honestly wanted Ukraine, I wanted Ukraine to win last week, even though I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Scotland fan. I really did want Ukraine to get through just purely because of what's happened to them. And I would have loved it if they had got past Wales and they'd got to the finals. And I would have been absolutely ecstatic if they won the World Cup, because then they could just stick two fingers up at a certain V. Putin who lives in Moscow.
Yeah, I mean, I watched the Ukraine game on Sunday, and to be fair, I thought they played well. They had quite a few good chances, and to me, They were denied a Stonewall penalty as well. Joe Allen went into the back of somebody, and it was a penalty. I don't know why VAR didn't give it, but I thought Ukraine were very unfortunate not to win that game. But listen, fair play to Wales. They did World Cup. We're not. But, we just have to keep on building. And I think I want to get your thoughts on Che Adams tonight. Again, he's maybe not a natural goal scorer, but he does a lot of good stuff off the ball. What did you make of him tonight?
Yeah, he's not the kind of person that you would say he's going to get you like 30 or 40 goals a season, for instance. That's just not who he is. But he drops off and he links up really well. But I think he's probably better suited to have a partner than to be like the sole striker. He's not really tall enough to be a main striker in that respect. That's why I always like watching him and Dykes. And I was quite sceptical about Lyndon Dykes, playing for Scotland. I honestly didn't think that, he had the wherewithal to be an international player. But again, he's somebody who's proved me wrong. I was a bit sceptical about Che Adams as well. But he's proved me wrong as well because he's done well when he's played for Scotland. And he gives 110% easily. You can see that in every game he's ever played. He's always running after the ball. He's always hounding people. There are times when maybe his decision-making is a wee bit suspect. He'll maybe take on a shot when he should maybe play the ball to somebody else or he takes a touch too many or whatever the case may be. But you can't fault the boy's, desire to do well when he's in a Scotland jersey. And that's all you can really ask for from a football player.
You mentioned him there, obviously wasn't playing tonight, Lyndon Dykes. Now, again, on Twitter last week, I saw a lot of Scotland fans saying, Dykes offers nothing. I think Dykes is a good foil for Adams. What do you think Lyndon Dykes brings to the Scotland team?
He brings that strength of an old-fashioned number 9. Now, there might be people watching this or listening to this tonight who don't understand what an old-fashioned number 9 is because they're not in the same generation as me. But I'm talking about guys like Joe Jordan, Ian Rush at Liverpool was another cracking example of the old-fashioned number 9. A guy that they could play a ball to, he could hold the ball up, he could jump and he could head the ball down to, his strike partner or, head to goal and get goals. And while Lyndon Dykes, when he was playing at Livingston, he created merry hell whenever they played Celtic. It was an absolute thorn in the Celtic team side. And then he got his move down to QPR. And in all honesty, I thought, well, that's probably the best level that boy's going to get to. And then there was all the talk about maybe getting into the Australian team or getting to the Scotland team. And at that point in time, I thought, Scotland is probably the better place for him rather than the Australian national team. But he's done well for Scotland. There are times when he frustrates you, but then, all footballers frustrate you as a fan, because they take an extra touch or, they don't play the ball that seems to be obvious. Like there was a couple of times tonight when I was watching the game tonight when I'm trying to think. It might have been Callum McGregor actually had the ball in the middle of the park. No, it wasn't. It was Jack Hendry had the ball in the middle of the park, and Robertson was clear on the left-hand side, and all I had to do was play the ball to him, and he obviously looks up and sees him, but then he turns and goes to the right, and I'm just like, why not play the ball out to the left? Your man's free on the left, And the same thing happened in the second half. It was McTominay this time, where the ball, the simple ball, was to play it out wide to Ralston, who was still on the park. No, it wasn't Ralston. It was Patterson, who had come on the park. And he turned inside and tried to play it through the middle. And he's got the quality to do that, McTominay. But, it's just that kind of thing, the simple ball. I always remember when I was playing football, you were always told by your coaches and your managers to play the simple pass. Sometimes the simple pass doesn't work out either. But, that's the kind of, football's a very simple game in many ways. and players themselves overcomplicate it. But no, overall, I think all of the Scotland players played well. As I say, there was nobody that you could say, "Oh my God, he was absolutely rubbish," and why did he not get substituted? But they all played their part. They all done well. At times, they all made the odd mistake. Even the sort of, if you like, the better quality players, made a few mistakes. I mean, there's a couple of decisions that Mckenna took, to take on shots when he might have been better served, playing the ball to somebody else, or he took an extra touch. But that's just how it is in football, It's easy.
In terms of our esteemed leader, Mr. Steve Clarke. Now, again, as we know, last week was a massive disappointment. Nobody's going to lie. He got quite a few things wrong last week. But again, I saw a number of comments saying, "Oh, Steve Clarke, he's rubbish, get him out," which I completely disagree with. I mean, what's your thoughts on Steve Clarke?
I've never really been a fan of Steve Clarke. I'm quite honest about that. But I can't deny the job that he's done since he took over with Scotland. He has improved the team. He's got them playing when they play to the system that they're using, like the system they use tonight. They play it well. He does sometimes make decisions, from my perspective, from a tactical point of view, shouldn't be getting made, like having Scott McTominay playing as a centre-back when the boy is clearly, a midfield player. Taking players off, that have been playing well, and putting on not necessarily better players, but maybe players of a similar, standard or ability. But the thing is, we don't have players that we can hold back in reserve that, with 20 minutes or 15 minutes to go in a game, we think, right, let's put him on because there's a good chance he's going to score a couple of goals. We don't really have players like that anymore. I think Ross Stewart and Jason Brown could be, because I've seen them playing for the respective clubs down in England, and they look like they've got, that kind of ability. I don't think Shea Adams or Lyndon Dykes have that kind of ability, but for what they do, they do a very, very good job. But we do need to have people that are going to be regular goal scorers, But it's always harder to score in international games than it is, at club football level.
This is something that I raised last week, talking to Graham Spears and Michael on that last week. I mean, something we spoke about for a long time is the fact that we don't have a lot of strikers in that Scotland national team. Why do you think there is such a lack of talent in that Scotland national team?
Well, I suppose the simple answer to that would be that at club level, we tend to bring in foreigners, for want of a better expression. And they're playing, in the main striking roles. So you're thinking like at Celtic, you're thinking of Giacomakis, Maeda, Furuhashi, these guys. Rangers, you've got,
Morelos.
Itten, Morelos, even to a certain extent, Hearts, with Boyle, so there probably is good young centre forwards out there, but they might not be getting the opportunity to play regularly with the first teams. And I think that was part of the problem for Ross Stewart. He was doing very, very well for Ross County. And to be honest, when he went to Sunderland, I was quite surprised because I thought the likely destination for him would have been, say, maybe like Hearts or Hibs, maybe Aberdeen, one of those teams. But he went to Sunderland and I thought, I don't know if, I don't know if he's got what it takes to. But do you know what? He's risen to the challenge, and he's been absolutely brilliant. As I say, I've seen him a few times playing for Sunderland and it just amazes me,
The one person I've not spoken about already. Well, he was missing tonight and missing last week. But when he comes back, we've got Kieran Tierney to come back into that Scotland team, and he is such a massive, massive player for Scotland. Do you think he was missed against Ukraine last week?
I think he was. You know, there was always that argument, wasn't there, or that discussion about can you have Tierney and Robertson in the same team, because effectively they're both left fullbacks. But Kieran Tierney has that ability to move in one, and play, as a central defender. And that's the success that Scotland have had of late when both Robertson and Tierney have been in the team. They've both been playing, so Robertson's been the left back, Tierney's been one in, within the back four and the left-hand side of the defence. But Kieran Tierney's a very clever football player. He's a very talented football player. And in all honesty, I wouldn't be surprised if you played him at centre forward and he was an absolute, nightmare for teams to have him playing against them. He's a very, very talented lad. And I did think myself, that they would have to sort of drop Robertson to put Tierney in. And they did try Tierney at right back a couple of times, and he did not too bad. But then that kind of made me think back again to the days when you had Sandy Jardine at Rangers and Danny McGrain at Celtic, and they were undoubtedly at that point in time amongst the best right backs in the world. But McGrain always had to play left back for Scotland because Sandy Jardine couldn't play on the left, but Danny McGrain could play either side. And Kieran Tierney's a wee bit like that, that he can play on either side.
To be honest, if you play Tierney up front, he probably score more than half our Scotland strikers. We don't have that many, so he might do a good job. You never know. But in terms of obviously tonight, it's a solid start, 2-0 victory. Was there? Listen, I know we keep saying that, no disrespect to Armenia, but was there any concerns for you tonight at all?
My only concern, and I think I'd said this in the WhatsApp group, I watched the Armenia-Ireland game last week, and I could see, the trouble that Ireland had against them. And Ireland are very similar to Scotland in a lot of ways when they play. And I just thought, I hope that somebody in the Scotland camp is watching this game and they pick up on the fact, I'm probably going to pronounce this boy's name incorrectly. I think it's Sperson, who is like the new Mkhitaryan, apparently, in Armenia, who's a terrific player. And then I can't remember the boy's name, but there's a lad who played number 7 for Armenia, the big kind of, what do we cry, a Grecian nose. Tommy Gemmell knows, actually, to put it in perspective. Very, very good player. But Scotland kept him quiet tonight, whereas in the game against Ireland, that lad had free rein, in that game. But Scotland, obviously somebody watching that game had picked up on the freedom that he had in the game against Ireland, and he didn't get the same kind of freedom. So they learned lessons, from watching the first game. But I always expected that Armenia would going to come out and would play, with 1 up front, and they would have 5 at the back and 4 in the middle. And it was then going to be a case of, can Scotland break them down? Which, to be honest, is something that we don't always do very well.
No, 100%. I mean, I said in the group chat that I quite like that system, that 3-4-2-1. I think it works really well. Yeah. In terms of the game on Saturday against Ireland, would you be making any changes, or would you keep roughly the same team? Because obviously we've won 2-0. We're on a bit of a high now after that result. Is there anything you would change?
I would go with the same formation. I might be inclined to give either Jason Brown or Ross Stewart a start with Shea Adams up front. So that would then mean you would either have to lose Christie or Armstrong but then they're players that if you didn't have them on from the start and say it was 1-1 or 0-0, with 20 minutes to go in the game, you could bring one of those players on if they weren't on the pitch already, and they can make a difference. Pretty much the same as I said at the top of the show with David Turnbull. I really don't understand why I know he was out for a long period, injured and all the rest of it, and he did come back into it, towards the end of the season. But I just don't see why he gets, into the squad, but he doesn't really get the opportunity to play. Obviously, maybe he's not doing something right in training. I don't know, because you don't know what's happening there. But I just kind of get the impression that maybe Steve Clarke doesn't really fancy him the way that he does, the likes of Armstrong, Christie, McGregor, these kind of boys. Maybe he just wants to be faithful, if you like, to the guys that have gotten him to where he is.
Yeah, I mean, someone that I'm a massive fan of who didn't start tonight was Billy Gilmore. Would you bring him back in for Saturday?
Well, do you know, like yourself, I'm a great fan of Billy Gilmore's. I really am, and I saw an interesting thing. Although I don't really put a lot of weight in it. Charlie Nicholas was quoted as saying that Billy Gilmore is the new Barry Bannon. And of course, Barry Bannon, when he arrived on the scene many years ago, was like the next best thing to sliced bread. It didn't work out the way that all the people thought it was going to work out. And I think Billy Gilmore needs to get regular games at Chelsea, or if he's back out on loan, whatever, he needs to play regularly. I mean, I thought when he went to Norwich, I thought he was going to be like, barring injury, he would be like one of the first names on the team sheet. And he didn't get many chances at Norwich either. So I don't see the point in taking a player to your club on loan if you think he's better than what you've already got and then not using him. But no, I would start with what we started with tonight and have Billy Gilmore as like an ace up my sleeve, if you like, because I think he could come on. Again, he's a player that can turn the game, and he's proved that himself, when he's, previous games he's played for Scotland, he said, he's been like head and shoulders above many of the other players, which is surprising because he's not very tall.
He certainly is not. I mean, if you look at that Scotland side and that Scotland kind of squad, I mean, we talk about the squad depth. That midfield is very, very strong. I think defensively, again, you've said it already, I'm not a massive Grant Hanley fan. I don't really think Liam Cooper's that great. But I think you've got John Souttar. I think McKenna's okay. I think Henry's okay. But I will always go back to the fact that for Scotland to really do anything at a major tournament or qualify for major tournaments, I think we need more options up front. And that just, it's not happening, unfortunately.
Yeah, as I said, again, it kind of comes down to that fact, as I mentioned before, where the young Scottish striking talent are perhaps not getting the game time at the big clubs where they're likely to do well. So you're talking about your Celtics, your Rangers, Hearts, Aberdeen, to a certain extent, Hibs, or, playing down south. And we don't really have anybody doing that. That's why I think Ross Stewart should be given the go-ahead, perhaps not against Ireland, because it's a very important game. But if that's the case, then, you should be organising some friendly games where, let's be honest, we don't care if we win, lose or draw them, but you're going to blood players, I mean, the successful Dutch side of the 70s and the early 80s only came about because during the 1960s, they took the decision to play lots of games with lots of young players and build on that. And, it didn't matter if these guys went out and they played, say, West Germany and they got beat 10-0. That wasn't the important thing. The thing was that they were building a team and they were getting young players that were very good players. And I used to I lost count of the number of times I said to people, that's what Scotland should be doing instead of relying on all the old guard that we did for so long. And now we've got a lot of young players coming into the Scotland team who are playing at a very good level. But unfortunately, they're not really centre forwards or strikers. They tend to be midfielders or they tend to be defenders.
So we have about half an hour to go. That's a quick hour, to be honest. And we've been, we say celebrating Scotland's victory against Armenia. Aye, why not? Celebrating a win against Armenia. I'll take any win after last week. But again, I've seen a lot of folks say that, the Nations League, waste of time, scrap it. How important do you think the Nations League is for a national team like Scotland?
Well, I think it was proven the last time round how important it was, that they done really well. They got themselves into that playoff position. And let's be honest, unless you qualify outright for any tournament, whether it's at club football level or whether it's at international level, playoffs are fraught with danger because you don't know who you're going to come up against. And 9 times out of 10, you come up against a team that, in inverted commas, are classed as being a lot less than you. And that's when you hit that banana skin. You know what I mean? It's happened to Scotland so many times. Even when we've actually qualified for tournaments, without any problem, we've come up against the likes of Peru and Iran, and teams like that everybody's like, well, hammer them. No, I'm sorry, that doesn't quite work out because sometimes players are too arrogant. And they themselves, I know they'll say they don't, but they're only human. So they themselves are going to think, we're up against Armenia, 92nd in the world. We'll walk over the top of them. But that team tonight didn't seem to have that attitude. They had that attitude whereby it doesn't matter who we're facing, we want to win this game. And that's how you should go into every game. Whether it's at club level or whether it's at international level, in any sport, actually, you've got to go in with that attitude that you're going to win. Because if you don't have that attitude, you'll never win.
I do get the feeling that obviously we've got Ukraine in the league, so we'll be playing them twice. I do get this feeling it's going to be like Israel all over again, and we're just never going to stop playing Ukraine.
It's funny you should say that because I'd actually forgotten that we've still got 2 games to play against Ukraine, and I think it was mentioned during the commentary on the game tonight by the commentators. That I think it's September. When we play Ukraine back to back, one at Hampden, one away. But then I thought to myself, if they are still in the grip of a war situation, surely the game won't be played in Ukraine. So it'll have to be played, in inverted commas, at a neutral venue. Will that play into our hands? No, I don't think so.
You can only hope.
That's why I think, it's vital that Scotland come away with 9 points out of these 3 games. 6 at an absolute minimum.
I completely agree. I completely agree. And to be honest, I'm going to say this now. I think Ukraine are a very good side, right? I do think they are a good side. But see, for me, I think Scotland should be looking to top this group.
Absolutely. I think when the group was announced, we have a kind of fatalistic attitude, and I know I do where the international team is concerned, but I've been around a long time, and I've seen the highs of Scotland teams qualifying for tournaments and the lows of the debacles of tournaments. And I've seen the lows of not being able to get to them. But when I saw that group coming out, my initial thought was that Ukraine and Scotland would be the 2 teams that would vie for the top spot. And I haven't changed that opinion at all. That's why, as I said, at least 6 points. Ideally 9, because then if we go in, because I think the problem I think that all the teams will have is like the problem Ireland had last week when they went to Armenia. It's not the easiest place to go to. It's a long old journey. Scotland are going to be a bit lucky when they play there next Tuesday, I think it is, that it's actually going to be later on. It's going to be like an evening kickoff, whereas the Ireland game was sort of like the middle of the day. So it was very, very hot. So although it will still be a lot hotter than what the Scottish players are going to be used to, it won't be as bad as, the conditions were for Ireland. And that will play into the hand of Armenia. And I'm trying to remember now, I might be wrong with this, but was it not a team from Armenia that Celtic played in a European Cup qualifier a few years ago where they had to wait before the game kicked off till they slaughtered a sheep or a goat or something as a sacrifice?
I think it was Armenia Bratislava, I think it was.
I can't remember. I just remember there being a game where, they had this ritual slaughter of a goat or a sheep or something like that before the game.
That's some memory you've got there.
Oh, do you know what? They say as you get older, your memory goes, but I don't know. My memory is quite good at catching useless information.
So I'm just looking here at some comments from Steve Clark. So Steve Clark is full of praise for the Scotland side's performance, saying the way we approached the game, the speed we moved the ball, the positions we took up against a very defensive team are all things that pleased me. We knew we'd have to work hard to break them down, and that's what we did. We kept trying the right thing at the right time, and eventually we got the goals. Professional footballers, you have to move on. You can't think about the last one. You have to think about the next one. We want to have a good campaign in the Nations League, and tonight was a good start. Can't disagree with any of that.
No, absolutely. And do you know what? I was thinking the same myself when I was watching the game, that when Scotland upped the pace and they passed the ball quickly and they made short passes, they were far more effective than when, they kind of slowed the game down a little bit. Armenia, I won't say they weren't fit enough, but they didn't seem to be able to cope with the Scottish players running at them at speed. You could see that with the likes of Ralston and Robertson on the opposite side, when they were running up the wing, and cutting back in and all that kind of stuff. And the great thing was that the other players across the front for Scotland, even the midfield players that were backing up, were always in open positions, so they were there to pick the ball.
He's also wanted to highlight the contribution of a man you've just mentioned, Andy Robertson. He said, it was important to refresh the team after the Ukraine loss. It was also important for the boys that played last week and went to go again. I've got to mention the captain. I thought he was outstanding. He was outstanding in the dressing room before the game. Himself, John McGinn and Callum McGregor are leaders to take us onto the pitch for 3 good performances. But I thought the captain tonight was exceptional. Just in general, as a leader, it's a role that Andy's really grown into. Sometimes he doesn't quite get the mentions that maybe he should. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I would, because I think there are times Andy Robertson's not a particularly vocal captain. It's a bit like Callum McGregor, when he's captain in Celtic. I had my doubts about McGregor becoming the Celtic captain because, unlike Scott Brown, who was very vocal, Callum McGregor's a quieter kind of guy. And Andy Robertson's a bit like that. And there were times in the early days when he got the captaincy that I would think to myself, boy's no captain material. He doesn't shout at people enough. But then when you think about it logically, he probably doesn't have to shout at them because, maybe that quiet word in their ear before the game at half time, or even just throughout the game with young players maybe coming in, having a wee word in their ear, saying, just calm down a wee bit and think about what you're doing when you're playing that ball. There's an easier pass than, trying to make that 30-yard diagonal or whatever. And I think that's where he's very good. And I would not disagree with Steve Clark in the fact that I would say that Callum McGregor, John McGlynn, and Andy Robertson are probably 3 stalwarts that would be brilliant in any team, either individually or collectively.
Do you think for guys like Ralston, for example, and guys like Aaron Hickey, they would obviously look up to a guy like Andy Robertson? He's won the English Premier League, he's won the European Cup. Do you think they will look up to a guy like that?
Absolutely. I think you have to. When you're a football player, especially when you're a young player and you're starting out, you've got to look at the experienced players who you're going to play with and even play against, because these guys have been there, done it, and they've got the T-shirt, as the saying goes. And they will have done everything probably that you would want to do in your career. So why wouldn't you, speak to them, and get a bit of advice? And especially if you are, like a left back or a right back, the guy that's in that position that's had a lot of success, why wouldn't you speak to them? And, the one thing that I've seen a lot of people saying about Callum McGregor, there was a lot of doubt about him when he was given the captaincy at Celtic. But a lot of people have been saying over the season, how effective he is. And it doesn't feel as if Scott Brown has gone, because when he's not on the pitch, he's always there for the players, and that's what a captain should be doing. It's obviously harder at an international level because you're not together, all the time. But when you are together, the captain should be going round the players and chatting to them and speaking to them and finding out how they're feeling. And that's the sign of a good leader.
Do you think McGregor will keep the mask of Zorro for next season as well? It suits him.
Aye, well, I wasn't thinking about the mask of Zorro. I was thinking more of the Lone Ranger. I was just wondering who they were going to get to be Tonto for him, No, I think, see, to be honest, I don't think he has to wear it just now. I think it's a bit like a comfort blanket. He's maybe at the back of his mind, he's got that wee bit of doubt, that I might pick up the injury or I might aggravate, that broken cheekbone. I think you'll probably find at the start of next season that'll be gone. He'll have built up his confidence through the summer and pre-season or whatever. Then again, I might be wrong, and maybe he just does like it, the Phantom of the Opera even. If he comes onto the pitch with a sword and a cape, then we'll start worrying.
I don't know, mate. I don't actually mind that if he does that.
Get up to the and making a big Z on the shirt.
What really surprised me today actually was the size of the crowd. I thought it was a much bigger crowd than I anticipated, especially after last week.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you. I know you said that in the WhatsApp chat as well, and I was kind of surprised, that there was such a big crowd as well, especially when you consider all that talk about, you might not get a train home after the game and all this kind of stuff, And let's be honest, football fans don't really care about whether or not they're going to miss the last train. That's not what they're doing. They'll always find a way to get to a game. They'll always find a way to get home from a game. It might take them longer if they can't get the train or whatever. But I did think that might have an effect on, especially fans, from like the East or up north and stuff like that. I did think that might affect them. But I didn't even think they would get like maybe 30,000. I thought they might get maybe 20 or something like that, 25 possibly. And it was a horrible night. Do you know what I mean? It really was a horrible night. I was quite surprised because I think I said to you in the WhatsApp chat, that relatively speaking, where I am in the east side of Glasgow, it was dry throughout the whole 90 minutes, but it looked on TV like it was absolutely bucketing down for 90 minutes.
That's what we love as Scottish people. We love the rain and doing slight tackles and sliding halfway across the pitch. That's what you want. Bit of blood and thunder. Get in there.
Well, that was certainly what made me such a great player.
Oh, I wish I could have seen you play. I really do.
I like to think that I was a kind of Franz Beckenbauer type. I wasn't the most skillful player, but I could always read the game quite well. And I was either playing at a right back or a very old-fashioned way of talking about it, right half, which would be like right midfield, or now it would be a wing back. Would probably be how it would get described.
It's funny actually, could you mention that? Because I was watching Liverpool TV the other day, and like they had like a very old game on it, and they showed like quite a few players from those days, and like beside their name it would have like left half or like wing half, and it's like I don't even know what that is. What's that?
Well, a wing half was the man who played one in from the right winger or the left winger, because he was halfway between the centre midfield player and the winger. So that's why he was known as a wing half. But technically speaking, a wing half and a right half are more or less the same. A right half tended to be more kind of like central defender, though, to be honest.
Coming on the show is always an education for me. It's great.
Us old folks have got some uses.
I could do with a cup of tea, go make me one. So, as I say, we're we're in Ireland on Saturday. Now, for me, we've already talked about it. This is a game for me that we should be winning. I haven't seen enough from Ireland to say that they're that good a side. So for me, I'm not going to say it should be a guaranteed win, but it's a game that we should be looking to win.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Ireland are kind of like in a rebuilding phase, if you like, at the moment. A bit like where Scotland were a few years ago. A lot of the Irish players who were getting them to like European championships and stuff like that are no longer there anymore. You know, they've retired and they've got younger players coming through. And the young players haven't quite bedded, if you know what I mean. Also, we spoke about this before the show. Stephen Kenny, I don't really think he is the man to sort of move Ireland forward. I mean, for me, the best two managers Ireland ever had were Jack Charlton and Trapattoni. You know,
I can disagree with that, yeah.
And no disrespect to Stephen Kenny, but he's nowhere near as good as those guys. You know, but like Scotland a few years ago, Ireland will come good again. You know, but they're just in that kind of period where a lot of the established players are getting to the end of their career, and the younger guys are having to come in and sort of pick up the mantle, as it were. You know, I mean, I know like Coleman, as I said earlier, was missing from the game tonight. He may well be missing at the weekend, depending on how, you know, he gets on with the injury. But they've got quite a few very good young players, but they're just not quite coming together yet.
You mentioned Ross Stewart earlier. Would you be playing two up front on Saturday, or would you stick with the one up front?
That is quite a difficult decision. You know, I don't really envy Steve Clarke to make that decision. If it was me personally, I would always have two strikers in my team. You know, I know that to a certain extent, well, depending on the players, right enough, but if there were two players that were quite happy, or one of them was happy to stay in the middle, you know, and allow the other one to kind of like float about, then that's ideal. But if you've got two players who can score goals and you've got them up front, then that's where you should have them. I see Stewart more as that kind of, not that out and out centre forward type player. You know, times when I've watched him when he's been at Sunderland, he's kind of floated around a little bit, but he's deadly when he gets into the box. Jason Brown, again, is kind of similar. The only player really that Scotland have that you could stick up there and say, right, you stand there on that penalty spot, and every time a high ball comes in, you've got to jump up and get it, would be Lyndon Dykes. But even Lyndon Dykes doesn't like to be there in the middle. He likes to kind of like float about. And that seems to be the way of it with a lot of modern centre forwards.
So you wouldn't play Grant Hanley up front, no?
Told you I wouldn't even have Grant Hanley in a pub team, you know, so... You know, I hope he's not watching this, because I might be destroying his personality or whatever, you know, his confidence, shatter his confidence with these comments. But no, I honestly don't think you should ever have a centre back playing centre forward. You know, even if you've only got a few minutes left in the game and you leave him up there, because, as I said, you know, you leave yourself open to that breakaway, as we said happened last week for Scotland. I mean, you even have times when they put the goalkeepers up there, you know, and I definitely don't think they should be doing that.
It's very rare that works, but on the occasion it does and the goalkeeper scores, it's brilliant.
It is, but, you know, as you say, it doesn't often work. So, you know, is it worth the gamble? That's what you have to ask yourself.
The one thing that I don't think a lot of folk realise about Ross Stewart, he's actually quite quick. I know he's tall, but he's actually got quite a bit of pace about him as well.
Yeah, he's quite a speedy wee character. That's the thing I think that kind of makes him slightly different from what we have, you know, at the moment, is that he's probably quicker in the front line than any of the other players that we have the options of. I don't think. Well, I know Lyndon Dykes isn't quick. I don't. Shea Adams is quickish, and Jason Brown is quickish. But I think if you were to have the forwards for Scotland in a 100-meter dash, I think Stuart would probably win it hands down every time.
Yeah, I mean, again, something else we spoke about last week, but again, I can get your thoughts on it because you weren't here last week, naughty boy. But so we talk about the kind of the lack of quality that Scotland have got up front, and again, something I mentioned on the show previously is the fact that, and Graham Spears actually said this last week, and I completely agree with him, that you've got a guy like Lee Griffiths, who for me should have been an absolute guarantee starter for Scotland. But we all know the issues he's had. But yeah, I mean, what a missed opportunity this has been for Lee Griffiths.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I mean, it's a shame that, like a lot of really, really good football players, he had these demons, you know, and he did things that probably if he was to, you know, say in 10, 20 years' time, look back on, he would hang his head and say, oh, why did I do, you know, X, Y, Z? Often he was his own worst enemy. And he thrived on, if you like, the hatred from the stands, you know, from the opposing fans. You know, I mean, you've seen that when he was at Hibs and he played against Hearts. You know, it helped him to raise his game. When he was at Celtic and they were playing Rangers, it helped him to raise his game. And he was that kind of player. He thrived on the love of his own fans, but he equally thrived as well on the hatred of the opposing fans. And he was so quick and he was great with his dead ball deliveries, but he was just unfortunately flawed and unreliable, you know. And I honestly thought that, you know, he was going to come back at Celtic, you know, and then obviously he got sent up to Dundee, and I thought, well, he'll do really well for Dundee, you know. And it, for whatever reason, didn't work. And he went to Falkirk, and well, as the saying goes, he was told to get to Falkirk, and he did.
I was so glad you finished that with Falkirk there. I was wondering where that was going there. But I mean, you just look back at those two incredible free kick goals against England and think, I mean, the guy he's such a talented footballer, and to have a guy like that in the Scotland team, you know, he's thrown it away, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other great thing about him as well was that he was a bit like Jimmy Johnson, you know, that if they put him down, he bounced straight back again, unless it was something really nasty, you know, that prevented them from doing it. But 9 times out of 10, you know, if a player tripped him up or, you know, kicked him, he just got up and he went back at it again, you know. He had a tremendous resilience in that respect. But as I say, it was just whatever, you know, demons he had, ultimately they won out, you know. And there's been a lot of great football players over the years who have not done as well as they should have done because of their demons.
So we've got just about 5-6 minutes left, so we're just gonna have a bit of fun here. I'm hosting, so I can do what I want, really. So I'm gonna ask James a question because he's slightly older than me. So
just a bit.
I'm gonna ask you, in terms of Scotland, who is the best player you've seen playing for Scotland?
Without a doubt, Dennis Law. The Law man. He was just such a fantastic goal scorer. And he was a pioneer because he was one of the, in inverted commas, British footballers who went overseas and was very successful, you know. Plus, he had a great success as a Manchester United player, then went to Manchester City, you know, and had a great success at Manchester City. You know, he was just like, the guy was just phenomenal, you know. And in some ways, I feel a wee bit sad when I see him now, you know, because he's been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's and stuff like that, you know. So he's not as sharp, you know. But even when he retired, he was always very sharp. You used to get him on you maybe not remember this, but there used to be a sports show called the Saints and Greaves Show with Ian St. John. Yeah. And he used to regularly kind of pop up on that, and he was always as sharp as a tack. But again, he came from a generation of footballers who really came from nothing. And therefore they were constantly hungry for success. It's like the best boxers in the world have always been the boxers that have come from poor backgrounds and, deprived backgrounds because they had to fight to get to anywhere, and a lot of modern sports people nowadays are not like that. And that's not to say that we should go back to the days when, there was such deprivation. We really shouldn't. But players, modern football players, relatively speaking, they have a very cosseted existence. And certainly, the kind of money that they can earn and the lifestyles that they have, for goodness sake, man, it's light years away. I mean, I remember when I was a wee lad growing up, I grew up in a place called Easterhouse in the east side of Glasgow. And Stevie Chalmers, the great Stevie Chalmers, lived in Easterhouse in a council house. Used to see him every Sunday going to church. That's just how it was, these guys, yes, they earned more than like my dad would have earned at that time. They were highly paid, by the standards of that day. But, they didn't have like a big mansion, that you couldn't get anywhere near. They were your next door neighbour, the kids went to school with you, all that kind of stuff. So that kind of hunger is no longer there. But there's been some really great Scottish players over the years, don't get me wrong, but for me, Dennis Law, definitely the number one. I mean, in my humble opinion, and it is slightly biased, I admit that, I think that Jimmy Johnson was never given the opportunity at Scotland level that he should have had. He was such a great football player, and I count myself lucky that I actually met him later on in life, after he'd retired and all the rest of it. But he was very much flawed as well. But for whatever reason, the demons never really got the better of him, and when he had to be there and turn it on, he was there and turned it on.
I think for me, I mean, I never saw him play anywhere near enough. As a Hearts fan, he was a Rangers player, but I always just thought, David Cooper was just such an absolute genius. What that boy could do with a football was just incredible. He really was such a talented footballer.
Yeah, absolutely. And do there was another Rangers player that I used to like watching. His nickname was the Tin Man. Ted McMinn was his name, and he was a winger, but he was the kind of player that you could never tell what he was going to do, because I don't even think he knew what he was going to do, And so many times, when I saw him play, he'd be running up at the defender and he'd be looking as if he was going to go to the right or the left. He would cut inside or outside, and he would have the defenders absolutely tied up in knots because they couldn't work out what it was that he was going to do. And often he lost out because of that very fact that, as I said, I don't really think a lot of the time he knew what he was going to do. He wasn't a educated footballer in that respect. He played very much with his heart, but he was a tremendous footballer, absolutely brilliant. But no, Davy Cooper, absolutely, I couldn't disagree with that one at all.
It's funny to talk about Dennis Law. I just remember when it used to be good, only an excuse. Johnny Watson used to do some brilliant impressions of him. When only an excuse used to be good until for the last few years, because it then got absolutely dreadful. But honestly, those were just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing, that there was always some great characters in football, which you've still got them, to this day, but perhaps not the same as they were, like 20, 30 years ago. There were some absolute characters.
So we have come to the end of our show. It's been an absolutely action-packed hour and a half, which is mental how time's quickly flown. So it remains me just to say thank you very much to James E. for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure. We will be back on Saturday after the Ireland-Scotland game from 7 o'clock. We will see you then. See you later on.
Thank you. Bye.